All right, so everyone, I just want to introduce you once again to our guest here. This is Slava of the Revolution Reports. Uh, Slava is a Marxist Leninist, a journalist, and, is it fair to say, Slava, you would describe yourself maybe as like an activist as well?
To a certain degree, yeah, doing what I can.
All right, cool, cool. So, the first thing I want to ask you about is Revolution Report itself. What are Revolution Report's objectives as an organization, and how long have you been involved with them?
So we're a media collective, basically doing the reporting to the best of our ability. And I have been with the Revolution Report for about 2 years. I started in 2022 when special military operation happened. Donald reached to me, Donald Corder, the editor-in-chief. He reached out to me because, I'm Ukrainian and he was really interested in getting a perspective of someone who's from Ukraine. And I'm also from Western Ukraine, which is highly nationalistic, right? So yeah, we had a discussion on the channel at first, and then he offered me if I want to join and contribute as much as I can. So little by little, I started writing articles. I started um, doing more research in on the topic of Ukrainian history and stuff like that, trying to kind of uh, put together the puzzle because when you grow up in Ukraine, you go to school and you get all that mainstream, propaganda, right? And then you start learning more and more, and you realize that not everything is making sense. So there was a lot for me to dig into and do research. And yeah, and now I'm here doing live streams with Don on the Revolution Report and running multiple different social media accounts for the Revolution Report as well.
Nice, that's really cool. So, just as a follow up to that, like you mentioned, you sort of been working there since the SMO, more or less. How long have you been working as a journalist, and what made you interested in the field?
Well, journalism was never my, my field. So basically, I started doing journalism when I started working with the Revolution Report. I'm actually like I never studied to become a journalist, so that's quite a new journey for me, and I learn as I go. I'm sure there is a lot to learn to become a really good journalist. But everything takes time, and I'm willing to be here and embrace it.
Yeah, I hear you. This is sort of like a second career for me as well. But yeah, it's something I think like a lot of careers is something you learn more about it as you do it. So yeah, so you describe yourself as a Marxist Leninist. How do you define that label? Because I think there's a lot of different ways people could go about describing that. How would you define it?
Well, Marxism in general is dialectical materialism, right? So it's about change, that everything is changing in this world, everything is developing. Marxism is what we call dictatorship of the proletariat, right? It's when workers rule, workers take means of production in their own hands. And Marx developed the theory, right? But he never developed it to the point of the revolution. So that's when the Leninism part comes in, right? Lenin actually proved in practice what revolution would look like, right? Marx just laid the grounds for it, theoretical grounds, and Lenin proved it. Of course, socialist revolutions in different countries look different. They're always adapted to the conditions of that certain country, and we don't know what the workers' revolution in the United States would look like. We can only fantasize about it, but that's the dialectics in it, right? It always takes new forms and it changes depending on the conditions. But that's not, who are we to dictate the rules, right? We should be just supporting and doing the best that we can. So yeah, that's why I'm Marxist-Leninist, because I want workers in the United States and everywhere else in the world to be in charge of what they're producing, not to be exploited by the capitalist.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I mean one of the big problems is communism is really misunderstood in the US because of, decades of Cold War, Red Scare propaganda. And it actually has a lot to do with the way Americans look at Russia. Like there's this reflexive thing in America that Russia equals bad, communism equals bad. Um, and I think there's probably some parallels there between the U.S. and especially Western Ukraine. So I just kind of want to know, like, how is the communist movement in Ukraine today? Since it was a former Soviet republic, how would you describe the level of support there?
Well, communism and Communist Party and everything related to socialism is banned in Ukraine. So that's your democracy, that's your freedom of speech. You know how they like to say that Israel is the only democracy in Middle East and Ukraine is democracy in Eastern Europe and stuff like that. All lies because Zelensky he actually banned all opposition. You can't speak against the government. You'll go to jail. You will go to jail in Ukraine even if you own any symbols of communism or socialism, like things from Soviet Union, right? So like I have here this poster with Stalin, or I have a statue of Lenin. If if they find out that someone has these symbols in Ukraine, they'll send that person to jail. They actually renamed all the streets that uh, had names like after, I don't know, Yuri Gagarin or some other Soviet scientists or activists. They renamed those streets after the Nazi collaborators from World War II times, Bandera, Shukhevich, and others. So they have been fighting with communism, right, for the past, I would say, 10 years. It started prior to that. The first time when they started banning things was after the Orange Revolution, which was 2003, 2004, and it was United States backed revolution, right? They denied the elections, and they said that no, the person who won is not legitimate and stuff like that. And after that, this pro-Western government started bringing back those like Nazi collaborators and glorifying them and stuff like that. So it was really after 2004, that's when I think things went wrong in Ukraine. And as of right now, the Communist Party of Ukraine is in exile. Last thing I heard, they're in Belarus. There are still some communists left who couldn't escape, and they are either jailed or under house arrest. I'm sure you've heard of brothers Kononovich. They are under house arrest right now. And yeah, there were lots of socialists and communists who were killed. Also, in 2014, there was a Odessa massacre. I'm sure you are familiar, and your viewers are also familiar with that. Yeah, they basically burned 50 people alive in Odessa Trade Union Hall. So yeah, this fight, it's always like that. When fascism comes, it's usually in response to socialism or communism, right? They want to crush workers that are trying to organize, and that's when they bring fascism. It's like their magic wand.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's funny because I've debated people about the origins of fascism, and a lot of people fail to understand fascism is like the hammer that liberal democracies use to crush socialism. It's not that fascism is the outgrowth of socialism or anything like that, or related to socialism because they're, people think that because they're illiberal movements, but fascism is illiberalism used to protect liberalism. And you see that, I mean, very obviously in Ukraine, right? Like the government there has closely aligned itself with fascists. And I kind of want to talk about that a little bit as well. To what extent would you say Nazism is a problem in Ukraine? Because, I mean, this is something with a rich history that some people hear, the Russian government talk about denazification and they kind of roll their eyes, but this is actually a really serious problem and has been a problem in not just Ukraine, by the way, but Eastern Europe more broadly. So, could you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, sure. So, yeah, you mentioned that Russians say that, and Putin himself, right? He said that one of the objectives of the SMO is to denazify. And a lot of people are fighting it back, and they're like, no, not all Ukrainians are Nazis. And that's true, not all Ukrainians. I mean, I have family living in Ukraine, I have family living in Donbass area too. So I'm familiar with what people actually believe in, and it's true that um, a lot of Ukrainians support those Nazi collaborators from World War II. So let me explain a little for those who don't know. After World War One, most of Ukraine, like maybe 2/3 of Ukraine, I should say, became part of Soviet Union, except the Western Ukraine regions. So there's like 4 or 5 states or regions, right, that were part of Poland between World War One and World War Two. And right before World War II, there was a nationalist movement starting to happen, develop in Western Ukraine. They wanted to break free from Polish dominance, right? And exactly in the same time, Hitler was, spreading his propaganda. And so lots of these nationalists, they picked up the Hitler's ideology because it was aligning with their ideology, to be separate, to be independent, to glorify their nationality and all that kind of stuff. And when Hitler was actually, in the beginning, he was just swiping in and then taking control over uh, one territory after another, right? And so these Ukrainian nationalists, they were like, awesome, he's gonna help us get free from Poland, and then he's gonna grant us independence. Well, how naive of them was to think that Hitler will help them in any way. He wanted to use them, right? So, but they were hopeful. So they were helping him, and they were committing massacres and so many crimes. They killed thousands and thousands of Jewish people, Polish people. Like right now, if you tell any older Polish citizen the word Bandera, they're gonna be shivering, because Bandera is associated in Poland with so many crimes. So they remember their history. They know that these Ukrainian Nazis, how many people they have killed. And so Bandera and his organization of Ukrainian nationalists, and there was another organization, they had the slogan Slava Ukraini, which bears my name, which means glory to Ukraine, right? It's like their version of Heil Hitler, like, glory to Hitler. So they were using it, and now Ukrainians brought it back and they're using it. That's why, sometimes I feel like how unfortunate that my name is associated with that, but it's actually giving me lots of opportunities to talk to people and explain to them what it means, because they're like, they hear my name, they're like, Slava? Is that like Slava Ukraini? And I'm like, yeah. So I'm actually now happy that it's part of my name. And so those Nazis were, most of them were killed during World War II because, as we all know, Soviet Union won. And but some of them had escaped, and they were helped by the CIA to get out of Ukraine, and they were brought either to Canada or to United States. And there is lots of information on this. It's not like I'm coming up with it. CIA actually declassified all that information in 2008. So you can just search CIA aerodynamics, and you will see documents on this, how they were helping Nazis escape, how those who remained in Ukraine underground after that Western Ukraine was incorporated in Soviet Union, some of them stayed underground, and they were helped again by the CIA with funds, with resources, and they were trying to sabotage Soviet Union projects and development and stuff like that. So they were kept there as a fifth column. And after the Soviet Union collapsed, they came from underground, and also those who were abroad, they came back, and they formed in 1991, they formed Congress of Ukrainian Nationalists, and they brought back all that glory of the World War II times, right? All those heroes, and they started slowly promoting that agenda. It took them a while because, Ukraine was part of Soviet Union, so they learned the Soviet version of history, right? That we beat Nazis. But then, in 90s and beginning of 2000s, with all these efforts of, I remember going to school every single year, we had a new history book. So history was revised in front of our eyes, like rewritten, right? And I remember when I started studying history, we didn't hear much about Bandera. But then when I was finishing high school, that's exactly when Orange Revolution was happening, and that's when they started telling all of us that Bandera is the hero, and he was not a bad guy. He was fighting for the independence of Ukraine, and it's so sad to witness, you know, how history was changed. Unfortunately,
Yeah, I mean it's actually really tragic, and I mean it's kind of strange to watch this as an American in real time because I remember back in 2017 when there were House bills being held up because there were people in Congress concerned that money that was being sent to Ukraine for aid would end up in the hands of like Azov, right? That was in 2017. And just recently, the Biden administration actually lifted the ban on sending arms to Azov specifically. And it's this strange kind of scenario where it seemed like the world was pretty united in like Nazism being a bad thing, right? And now the power dynamics have shifted in a way that hey, we'll send weapons to Nazis in Ukraine because it meets our goal of like depleting Russia's military capacity. And I do kind of want to talk a little bit about the conflict itself, because I think a lot of like for most Americans, this whole thing came as like a shock because most Americans in 2022 had no clue there were any problems in Ukraine at all. They were just unaware of Maidan and, never heard of Maidan, never heard of Yanukovych or any of that stuff. So I have to ask you as a Ukrainian, were you shocked when the SMO began? What were your initial thoughts?
I wasn't shocked. I didn't know. I didn't think of it that it's gonna take, such a scale, right? I thought it's going to be very local. I thought it's gonna stay in Donbass, right? So I was surprised that it took, much bigger territory, right? The fight. That was a surprise to me, but I wasn't surprised that the actual SMO started because I was watching from 2013. I was closely watching what's happening, and I told you earlier that my family lives in Donbass. My aunt lives there, so I'm familiar with what their life was during those 8 years between 2014 and 2022, how much they have suffered from the Ukrainian state bombing them and trying to kill as many as possible. I think 14,000 civilians have died, and this was not reported at all. Nobody knew, like you said. American media didn't care about it at all, and so, to those who don't know, Maidan, or as they call it, the Revolution of Dignity, even though it's a ridiculous name, because where's their dignity right now, right? But that Maidan have started for one reason only, because the president of Ukraine at that time, Yanukovych, decided to deny IMF loan which came with a ton of different conditions that would mean economic suffering for Ukrainians. Whereas Russia was offering a loan and a discount on natural gas. And it didn't, Russia was like, okay, you can still deal with EU and IMF and deal with us. We don't care. But IMF and EU were like, no, if you deal with Russia, we cut all ties with you and you're going to pay the price. So they were threatening him basically. And all of those Nazi organizations they have been propping from 90s, right? They railed them up and they, created the illusion that it's a people's uprising, and lots of regular people did participate in this, originally, right? But then everything was taken over by these right wing, like Nazi. I'm sure you've seen some pictures with them, walking with torches and holding black and red flags and bandera portraits. And so they took over the whole thing and they ousted Yanukovych. He had to run away. If he didn't, they would have probably killed him. And right after that, Donbass, those two states, Donetsk and Luhansk, they didn't like the outcome of the so-called revolution. They didn't want to be under fascist government. So they're like, hey, how about we get some sort of an autonomy? They weren't asking to join Russia at first. They were like, we just want to have autonomy. Crimea had autonomy for many, many years, right? So that's why Putin, they were able to take Crimea back, and Crimea was never like Ukrainian, right? It was given to Ukraine during the Soviet Union, but it wasn't Ukrainian. So Donetsk and Luhansk, they wanted some sort of similar conditions, like to be an autonomy, and Ukrainian government said no, no way, and they actually went with war against them. They called that anti-terrorist operation. Right now they're mad that Putin is calling it special military operation. But hey, it's all fair because they were calling those people terrorists and other like subhuman, like derogatory terms. They were calling them roaches and all kinds of language. Because Ukrainian army at first didn't want to fight. Like it's their own people, right? Some of them had families, so they had to dehumanize those people. And also because the army didn't want to be involved, they had to incorporate all of those Nazi groups into the army so they can be at the front of the operation, right? So that's how, Right Sector, Aidar, and Azov, became popular because they had been officially incorporated in Ukrainian army. And you're right, at first, in 2017, 18, they were reporting about crimes because their crimes were so bad that they just couldn't hide it anymore. They would just massacre villages, right, and torture people. So Amnesty International were reporting on those crimes, and media just had to kind of mention it. Even ADL, Anti-Defamation League, the Jewish organization, they had to step in and say, yeah, Azov is no good. No, 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 don't do it, right? But then guess what? As soon as SMO started, ADL came out and said, no more problem with Azov, all good. And the same way with American media. They're like, yeah, we should help them. So these double standards and hypocrisy is just astonishing. It's like, it's crazy. We actually, at the Revolution Report, Donald Corder, he went to Donbass before SMO started. He started filming a documentary in Donbass. He wasn't able to finish it before SMO, so he continued after the start of SMO, and then we released it in October or November 2022. It's called 8 Years Before. You can find it on the Revolution Report YouTube channel, where you can listen to the stories of people who lived and continue living there, and how difficult it was for them all of those 8 years, and how much they were begging Russia to step in and help. Of course, Ukrainian side is accusing Russia of being there from the beginning. They're saying that Russia was helping them from the beginning, but I don't, I don't believe that because first of all, if Russia was helping from the beginning, then Donbass would have been free by now, right? Um, but we know how much they have destroyed. The like so much infrastructure was destroyed during those 8 years, and so many people were killed. And lots of people were wondering why Putin is not stepping in, right? But I just think, this is my personal opinion, is he wasn't ready. As a country, they were not ready. Because everyone understands that it's not Russia just facing Ukraine. It's United States fighting Russia on behalf, like using Ukraine. So yeah, so Russia had to prepare. They had to bring their army in a proper condition, right? Economically, when they took Crimea back, so there was like a way of sanctions on Russia, right? So they had to first battle those sanctions and kind of change the way they deal with all these corporations, economy, all of that. So then, they knew that if they start special military operation, there was going to be even more sanctions. So they had to get ready for that, and probably that's why it took them 8 years.
Yeah, that actually you hit on a number of things there, and that clarified a couple of things because I have heard that argument from people who are a little bit more informed that, like, oh, well, if it really is about NATO expansion and it really is about Maidan and, the people in the Donbass, why did Putin wait till 2022? And I think you're right. It's like, for one thing, believe it or not, I think Russia kind of wanted to allow for the opportunity for like a diplomatic resolution. That's why they didn't just jump in 2014 and invade, right? Yes, they took back Crimea, but as you mentioned, Crimea in like every measurable way is Russian. Like a vast, I think it was something like I forget the percentage, but an overwhelming majority of the Ukrainian Navy stationed in Crimea when Russia annexed Crimea turned right over to the Russian side. They didn't fight, they didn't resist whatsoever. And referendums and polling has all shown, a vast majority of Crimeans are perfectly happy to be part of Russia. And I'm sure, and I've argued about people with this too. The same is true in the Donbass. That a vast majority of the people there would like to be part of Russia, and so it's interesting that like communists or leftists don't really understand the plight of the people in East Ukraine and their desire for autonomy and self determination. They think, and a lot of Americans think, like, we're resisting imperialism by fighting Russia, when the reality is we're the imperialist power. Ukraine is just the next frontier of our imperialist expansion. It was part of Russia's sphere of influence. Now we want it to be part of ours. So look, I have one kind of like final question here, and then we'll see how much time we have left. I know you're kind of crunched on time, but um, a lot of Americans support this conflict out of a legitimate like goodness in their heart. Like they support helping Ukraine because they think that they're doing the right thing. They think that, hey, Ukraine is this small country that I don't really know much about, even though it's not really all that small, but, weaker, poorer country that's being attacked by the big bad wolf in Russia. And so we got to stand up to Putin and fight. And what would you say to the Americans who want America to continue to send military aid to Ukraine out of the goodness of their hearts?
Well, I would tell them to look into every other war and conflict that has been happening in the past, let's say 100 years or 50 years. The way United States have been, what they were doing in the Middle East, Syria, Libya, Afghanistan, Iraq, and all of those countries. And where was United States doing it out of goodness of their heart? Why were they going into those countries, right? For what reason? Um, Same with Israel and Palestine, right? Like I'm seeing lots of people having Palestinian flag and Ukrainian flag in their Twitter profile or Facebook profile. And I'm like, no, that's if you want to equate Palestine to something, then it would be Donbass, not Ukraine. Ukraine is equal to Israel. They are the extensions of or arms of United States imperialism. They serve that role. And even they had a survey recently in Ukraine, and they asked Ukrainians, who do you support in Israel-Palestine conflict? And only 1% of Ukrainians answered Palestine. Majority have support Israel, because their ideology is the same. United States, with its imperialism, they don't support somebody because of democracy, like they say, right? It's because they want something from that country. It can be manpower, it can be resources, it can be influence in that region, it can be anything. So with Ukraine, one thing is resources. Ukraine is so rich in, black soil. You can grow anything in there, right? It has many minerals, it has natural gas, it has probably everything except oil. But for oil they have Middle East, right? So they divide the world like that. That's why United States want to control Ukraine, because they want all of those resources. Also, they want cheap labor, cheap manpower. That's what imperialism has been doing for the past 100 years, extracting everything from around the world. And if you explain this to people, then they understand, that it's not in our interest as, people who live in America. It's our taxpayers' money that goes for defense, and they call it defense, but it's actually an offense. We're actually acting like a bully, and going around the world and trying to, submit everyone under our power, under our rule. And that's why countries like Russia and the whole anti-imperialist bloc, right, what they call multipolar world, they're fighting against this. They want to have a mutual cooperation based on, something that would benefit everyone in the same way, not just, United States doing what they consider beneficiary for them. And it's not like what the United States doing is benefiting the country, the people of the country. It's benefiting 1% or I don't know how many, right? The capitalist class of our country. It's not benefiting the people. The quality of life went down so much in recent years. And I think more and more Americans are realizing it. And maybe they can't put two and two together. So that's why, I try to do my job and explain to people and tell them that Ukrainians, the voices that they hear, the voices that say, oh, yes, help us, it's the voices of Zelensky and his mafia, his little clan, and Ukrainian diaspora who are here and they don't care how many people die or starve or, because they're already in the United States. So I don't like what diaspora is doing, because they're telling Ukrainians to suffer. They're saying, yes, continue this war with Russia, but none of them wants to hop on the plane and go fight themselves. They want to do it at the cost of Ukrainians. The actual Ukrainians, they don't want to be fighting anymore. There's so many people who are avoiding draft at all costs, like hiding in basements, not going out. There are people who are escaping the country in all possible ways. Like they're paying so much money. Ukraine is still a very corrupt country. I think the most corrupt in Europe. So they're paying like $5, $8, $10,000 to these border, people, border patrol, right? And they're trying to escape, but not everybody has money. So the people trying to swim over the river or go over mountains, some people die doing that, especially like in cold period of year, right? They freeze in water. There was even a case a couple weeks ago that someone was shot at the border for illegal crossing, right? So you can clearly see that they don't want to continue fighting. There's even I saw, I'm not sure how true it is, but Ukrainian government put out a number of 100,000 uh, men who were drafted, who were sent to front lines, and they disappeared, which means they ran away. I'm not sure how accurate this number is because they could include so many who were actually killed. They could include them in this number just so they don't have to pay um, any money to the families, right? Because according to the law, if the man gets killed at the front lines, the family is supposed to receive so much money. And of course, they don't want to share. They want to get all the money from European Union and from United States and keep it to themselves. So Zelensky's wife can go shopping in boutiques and buy herself all the luxury items, right? I'm sure you've heard of her in was it in France or somewhere else that she spent like 40 grand in one day. So yeah, lots of men are running, escaping. They don't want to fight, and they're about to start drafting women. So it's like it got so bad, and I'm sure the more it's going to continue, the more resistance they will witness, right? So it will only get so far. Eventually, Ukrainians will realize that, they're being used. They're already realizing it, but they're not ready to actually stand up to the government. So I hope very soon this will finish because we're all realizing that Ukraine cannot win. It's just impossible. And it's time for negotiations. And Zelensky's days, I think, are numbered. Pretty soon, his own people probably gonna kill him. That's my feeling.
Yeah, and with that being said, I have one final question for you, because I know we're almost out of time, but I just want to know, like, we're seeing like what I would consider a pretty drastic escalation in this conflict in the last several weeks. The Biden administration has given Zelensky the go ahead to use U.S. weapons to strike targets within Russia. The Russian Navy has been recently deployed just outside of Cuba. A lot of people, and you talked before about how the U.S. government does things not for the benefit of the average American citizen, but the 1%. Well, the average American citizen is looking at, the Russian Navy just outside of Cuba and saying, hey, we're right within striking distance here. This is kind of frightening. And, I guess what I want to know from you is like, given all of the escalation, where do you see this ending? And I know it's anybody's guess, but you seem to have a lot of information, and obviously your background as a Ukrainian. Where do you see this conflict ending? Do you think it'll be an all-out war between the U.S. and Russia, or do you think this will be, some sort of, I don't know, grinded out kind of proxy conflict for another year, or do you think possibly we're near a resolution soon? What's your opinion?
Well, I don't think it'll be all out war because United States they only make it look like they're almighty, all powerful, and they have all these weapons in the world, and they do spend a lot of money on their defense budget. But I think it's a shell. Um, Behind it or inside of it, there's nothing to actually. From what they have been sending to Ukraine, half of the things didn't work. So, it's all, they're not creating any new weapons for years. They're just manufacturing the same old stuff, right? Russia actually stepped up a game, right? Recently, they started, they have hypersonic missiles. They have all kinds of new weapons that the United States is not near that. So I don't think United States will poke the bear any longer. Most likely, they will put it on a freeze. You know how, like Afghanistan or other wars, right? They stop actual, like, active fighting, but then the conflict goes on for another 10, 20 years until the troops get out and stuff like that, like frozen conflict. So I think most likely Russia will either take Odessa and Ukraine will basically say, that's it, we can't take it any longer. It will leave, or maybe Odessa will remain being Ukrainian. I don't know. It kind of seems logical for me that Russia would want to take Odessa because Odessa is Russian speaking. And also, Odessa borders Transnistria, which is that tiny little country which is not even recognized by most of the world, between Odessa region by the Black Sea and Moldova. A little part is called Transnistria, and they don't want to be part of Moldova. Russia has its peace troopers there. So it would make sense that they would want to take Odessa and also, kind of unite all of that territory. But I'm not sure if that's on their agenda or not. But I do think that the conflict will be frozen sometime soon because Ukraine is running out of manpower and the United States is running out of weapons because recently the Israel added to the list, right? So they have to supply Israel with lots of weapons and they don't have that much. But they usually, I've noticed when one conflict kind of starts to go down, they open another one somewhere else. And recently, I've noticed in Georgia, of all places, they started brewing something, right? Was that the foreign agent bill that they've just passed? So I'm expecting that it could be Georgia or it could be Taiwan because they have been propping Taiwan too for a conflict with China. So it could be that they will take a break and then open something else, or it could be that they're like right away open something elsewhere just to kind of calm Russia down and say, hey, we're not going to be fighting anymore, They do need breaks. I've noticed every time there is a little break between active fighting, just so the empire can recharge. And I just hope that people will take advantage of this. And I'm not sure at what level of the revolutionary state we are, uh, but I do hope that sooner or later people will take over and put an end to all these wars because war is no good. People are suffering, and I'm not a pacifist. I'm all for resistance fighting, right? And war of liberation is a just war. But still, war is not good, and I do wish that the conflict in my home country, in Ukraine, stops sometime soon because I just can't take it any longer. Watching how my family members are being drafted and sent to the meat grinder, it's just so awful. And for all of these 2 years, I couldn't sleep good because I was so worried about my dad, my brother. Thankfully, my dad just turned 60 not so long ago, so he's no longer in danger zone, unless they raise the age, because as of right now, it's still 60. So my dad shouldn't be drafted anymore. But my brother, he actually just got out of Ukraine, so I'm very relieved. I was so worried in the past few weeks because we were in the process of getting him out, but now I can finally sleep good because I know my brother won't be taken. And in few days, I'm sure you've been watching this closely. On April 18, I believe they passed new mobilization bill, and some of those things, the part of the bill, will go in effect June 18. So they gave people 2 months to renew all of their documents, military registration. So according to this bill, after June 18th, any man who they stop on the streets, if they don't have updated military registration, they will be arrested and they will be sent to the front lines. So I was like, really, I wanted my brother to be out of Ukraine by June 18, and he finally made it. So I'm really happy. But in the same time, I know what's gonna happen with lots of men who didn't make it, like, who were not able to leave Ukraine. They will be drafted, and it's really bad because they don't want to do it. They want to live, and everybody deserves to live. So I really hope it finishes soon.
Okay, well, thank you so much for the time. I really appreciate it. And just for anyone in the audience, radio or on Twitch, where can we find your work? Where are the places you'd like to plug specifically?
Social media, you can find me on Twitter as Ukrainian Socialist. That's my personal account. And The Revolution Report. We are on Twitter, we're on YouTube, and we have a website, therevolutionreport.org. So you can read our articles there, you can watch our YouTube videos. We're actually right now translating an interview with two Ukrainians, wife and a husband, who right now live in Moscow, but they are from Ukraine. They lived under Soviet Union in Ukraine, and then they moved to Russia, to Moscow. So they have a lot to say about the life under Soviet Union, the life in Ukraine in general, and how they made it to Russia and all that kind of stuff. So I'm translating right now the video from Russian to English, and probably sometime next week, we're going to release it so you can hear some other Ukrainians tell their story about the whole conflict and the life in general. So yeah, many exciting things are gonna happen sometime soon.
That's awesome. All right, thank you so much for the time, and I hope we can talk again in the future.
Of course. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.